Thank you very much, Hillel. I'd first like to say what a privilege it is for me to be on the panel with such eloquent and dedicated people working on such difficult issues and in such difficult settings. As Hillel noted, I've been asked to give some sort of overview for the things that have been said to date, and I thought what I would do is try to make three but distinct related points based on the discussion so far. And the first is something that Maria Leisner emphasized, and I agree with her. I think one of the trends of the most recent period has been challenges to the established democracies, and we've seen this in a variety of ways. It's true both in the United States, it's true in many countries in Europe. The financial crisis in 2008 and the years thereafter had the effect of accentuating problems that may have already been underway in many countries. And I think this has had, among other effects, the effect of sapping some of the confidence of the democracies to stand up for democratic and human rights values. I'll come back to that. The second point I would stress, and this is something that Freedom House and other observers of democratic trends have noted, is that although the last 30 years have actually been quite good for democracy globally, if you look over that span of time, the last 10 years have not been very good. And one of the features of the last 10 years has been a deepening of authoritarianism in a wide range of key states. And I think it's fair to say that this has been a deepening of illiberalism in many settings. So we've heard about not only states that are becoming more repressive, but now we confront non-state actors that have many of the instruments of states. We heard absolutely horrifying and gripping depictions of this coming from Iraq and what the Yazidi people are facing, being in large measure perpetrated by what are non-state actors, albeit with some of the instruments and methods of states. And so if we look at both the depth of the changes, but I would also say the diversity, one thing that's so striking just with the people sitting on the panel with me is how many different parts of the world are facing deepening repression in so many ways. And I think you can almost see the pattern and piece it together just by hearing in a few minutes the stories coming from so many parts of the world. These in many ways are governments that are unaccountable at home. And I think what I would stress, and I think it's important where we're sitting today, is that one of the features of the recent years of the deepening illiberalism that's happening in so many places has been the projection of this influence beyond borders. And I think it's one of the most important features of what we're seeing. So the most influential illiberal states have the capacity to exert influence beyond their borders. They do this in a variety of ways. We see this in the form of media manipulation. There's a long list of examples one could give of countries that are investing heavily in this. We see it in the form of learning from one another on how to suppress civil society, both in the forms of legislation and regulations, but also in the sorts of arguments that are made through media as well, to tarnish civil society activists, to force them onto state television to make confessions, to otherwise put them in the spotlight in the worst of ways that can also have very dangerous and lethal outcomes. But what I'd like to stress now by way of conclusion is that the very institutions that are supposed to form the bedrock and the backbone of the rules-based order to support human rights and democracy are absolutely in the crosshairs of these governments. Absolutely in the crosshairs. So if you look at the United Nations and the bodies within the UN that are most critical to human rights, it's where so much attention is devoted from the non-democracies. If you look at regional bodies, and I'll just stress this here because I think what's happening at the regional level is critical, but it's often overlooked. If you look at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, especially its Office for Democratic Institution and Human Rights, this has been a target of the non-democracies in the 58-member OSCE body. If you look at the Council of Europe, which is likewise supposed to be a standard setter, absolutely been a target of the non-democracies. If you look at the OAS in Latin America, absolutely been a target of those countries that don't support democratic rights. And I could go on. The challenge here is for the democracies to support their values and standards. And this comes back to my original point, which Maria stressed in her remarks. The trends that have been concurrent are the democracies weakening and losing their confidence in many ways. At the same time, very powerful illiberal forces have been gaining the momentum. I think if we don't find a way in the democracies to strengthen our spine and refresh our own values and standards, we're in for a very rough ride. But I think it's still possible. And I think this sort of event, and I really commend UN Watch and all of the groups that have convened it, is so critical because I think the established democracies can learn a lot from people working in the tougher environments. And maybe that can be one of the ways we can refresh our own standards and values. Thank you very much.